Hello. Today I am going to give you your rice pilaf demo. So we've talked a little bit about grains and rices. With this pilaf, we're actually going to be using a rice and a pasta. This is really typical with your boxed pastas that you'll see, like rice-a-roni. If you look at the different grains that are in there, they don't all look the same. There's a few different ones in there. Typically, it's a rice and a pasta. So with the rice that we're using today, we're going to be using a long grain rice. And we talked about rices, that there's long grain, short grain, medium grain rice. So we're going to use a long grain rice. It's definitely a lot different than a short grain rice. Try to show you an example here. So I have a short grain rice here. It's a little bit just about as long as it is round, but it's shorter. Then I have a long grain rice. So this one is definitely longer and skinnier. It's not going to be as round. And then the pasta we're using is an orzo pasta. And orzo pasta is commonly mistaken for a grain, but it literally is just a pasta. Teeny tiny little pasta, little football shapes is what we call them. But that's an orzo pasta. And if you don't have these on hand, you don't have a bunch of them. I did. I just went to Winco and got bulk section orzo and long grain rice, just to get a little bit that I needed, so that I don't have to buy a big package or a big bag if I'm not super committed to buying a bigger package. I don't want that kicking around in my cabinet all the time. So the rice pilaf, like I said, the one that we're going to make is going to be similar. Our end product's going to be similar to that box stuff you get, but it's not boxed. It's going to be homemade. It's going to be from scratch. So I have some mise en place here, and I want to get a little bit more mise en place. So I have some rice and some stock and some parsley and an onion. So I need to get a little bit of knife work done before I can turn my heat on. So I want to make sure that my knife work gets done so that my butter and my oil that's going to be in my pan doesn't burn before I'm ready for everything. So that's another part of mise en place, is getting my knife work and all my measuring done. So let's get in to my knife work that I need. So knife work that I'm going to need to do is going to be a half cup of diced yellow onion, 1/2 cup of diced yellow onion, and I need a tablespoon of fresh chopped parsley. We're going to add this to the end of cooking, but I will want to do a tablespoon of fresh chopped parsley, and I'll get my knife work done, like I said, at the beginning, so that I'm good to go for everything. So with cutting an onion, it's the most common thing to be cutting in a kitchen. And I'll show you the best way to get there. Talked about this in knife skills. So that I want to cut the root off, but I don't want to cut it all the way off. I want to get this part that was in the dirt off of here, but I still am leaving that root end intact. I can cut the top off here, and then now I have this great flat spot. I can go ahead and cut this in half. Get rid of that paperyness on the outside. I only need 1/2 cup, so I certainly will not need the other half there. All right, so focusing with just my half onion that I have. It's cut in half. I still have the root end intact. That's a good sign. Leaving it on its flat spots. So then I'll make those rainbow cuts that kind of mimic the shape of the onion. And I want this to be somewhat of a small dice because I am working with some smaller bits here with my rice pilaf. So I don't want onion that's really, really large. It's going to cook down, but I still want onion that's going to be somewhat small, and they're just not going to overpower and just kind of poke out of my rice. I want everything to blend together pretty well. So holding my knife properly, and then also that claw, I'll use that rainbow cut to make sure I cut down to the cutting board, but not through the root here. the closer I make these cuts together, that smaller that dice is going to be. And then now I can turn it and then make these cross cuts this way. Again, smaller, closer together those cuts are, the smaller my dice is going to be. See, I only need half a cup. Let's do one more. So not quite the whole half an onion here. Half a cup of my diced onion. And while I got my cutting board out, let's go ahead and get my parsley done. So my parsley is a fresh herb. I use fresh parsley here. And since I have a fresh herb, we learn a lot about that in culinary too. But my fresh herb, I want to add at the end of cooking. I'm not going to add this at the beginning. My directions will tell me that. We'll get into that. But this will be at the end of cooking because I want to keep its nice, fresh, herby flavor. And it's nice bright green color. I'm going to give this a quick rinse. So I have washed parsley now, dried the best I can. So with this parsley, when I chop it, all I really want is the green leaves. This is curly parsley. There's also Italian parsley, and that's the one that's flat. It gets commonly mistaken with cilantro, but if you smell them or taste them, you'll notice a difference. So I just want to pull off the green leaves. And I can do that just by hanging on to the stem and pulling close to where the green leaves are. And they should come off. If I get a few stems, it's not a big deal. I just don't want to avoid a lot of stem because it's the green bit that I want. So with my parsley, I need a tablespoon. 1 tablespoon of chopped parsley. So the best way I'm going to get that parsley chopped is I could get my knife in here and start chopping it, but it's really like airy and pillowy. And usually when I get my knife in there, it just starts flying everywhere and it makes this job really cumbersome and it's like 3 times as long of a project versus doing this. So what I want to do with leafy herbs is I want to ball this up as tight as I can, but to give me kind of a centralized spot to be cutting. So I can get this underneath my fingertips and I still have that nice claw and this knuckle here. So then I can start making these sawing, chopping motions as I just kind of work my way through this pile of parsley. Gently moving my fingers back, knowing that when I get too close and I have nothing else to hold on to, if you look at what I got left here, there's not a whole lot to hold on to. So then now I can just go through and chop. So since I went through quite finely with that pile, I'll just make a few more chops here. And now that is plenty fine for my parsley or for my rice pilaf at the end. This is going to add a nice bright green color into my rice pilaf. So just a tablespoon. Definitely have way more than I need. I can always save it for something else. And then I'll save that. But that's all my knife work. Now I can go ahead and get the rest of my measurements done and get my pan hot and I can start my pilaf. So for the rest of my ingredients, what do I need here? I need 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons. My butter, I need a 1/3 cup of butter. So if you get your butter sticks, you can notice on the paper, it'll tell you the little lines to tell you to get to where to get a 1/3 cup of butter. You can also know that a 1/3 cup is equivalent to 5 1/3 tablespoons. So that's what I have inside my pot, 5 1/3 tablespoons. I'll get my olive oil in here, 2 tablespoons. My heat is not on yet, take note of that. Still getting a little bit of mise en place ready here. I have my 1/2 cup of diced onion. I will need a 1/3 cup of orzo pasta. A 1/3 cup of orzo pasta. I'm going to need 1 full cup of the long grain rice. 1 cup of long grain rice. And then now I have a bunch of dry spices and some seasoning here. So what I have in here is a teaspoon of kosher salts. Your recipe says kosher sea salts, but a teaspoon of salt. I prefer kosher salt. 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. Is this gonna focus? It'd be really pretty if it focused, maybe. A 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper. A 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. And a 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder. So I've obviously measured all these into one little bowl because they're all going to go into the rice pilaf at the same time. I also have chicken stock. 2 cups and 2/3. 2 cups and 2/3. Where am I at there? 2 2/3 cup chicken stock. If you have chicken stock at home that you make, great. Or chicken broth. If you have something in the freezer, I did not have anything in the freezer, so I just bought this. This is just fine. Sometimes if I don't feel like I want to get that whole bucket, because this is a quart and I'm using just a little over a quart, so I still have half of this left. Sometimes I'll use just the cans, because the cans will get you about a cup, a little over a cup. And then I'll rinse the can out with water, and then I'll substitute with that. If you don't have stock, you could totally just use water. The stock and the broth gives a little extra flavor. Water is fine. Half water, half stock, all stock. Either one of those will work, but it's the liquid, right? That's the right amount of liquid that we want, because when we work with white rice a lot, it has a certain ratio that we have X amount of rice with X amount of water, and then we're going to get the perfect product. We have rice and pasta and a specific amount of liquid, and then they're going to come together and make a right perfect product. So your liquid amount with accurate measuring and accurate measuring of my dry ingredients is going to get me a better product here. And then the last one here is my tablespoon of parsley that I chopped. So with my steps that I have in a medium saucepan, so I want to make sure I have something big enough. I have almost half a quart, or a little over half a quart of my liquid, and I've got a cup of rice. I want something that's going to hold all of those things. So I have a medium pot here. In a medium sauce pot, set over medium heat, add the olive oil and the butter. So I have olive oil and butter in here. So I'll get a medium heat. And I want to make sure that my butter is going to melt and my oil is going to get hot. My things in the order that I want them. I work best that way. But I want to make sure I'm not burning this. Once I have butter and heat, I want to be careful because the butter can burn really easily. The oil can eventually burn, but it has to get to a higher temperature before that will ever burn. So my butter is going to be really delicate, and it's likely of burning if I'm not careful, I'm not paying attention. So the medium heat, not too high. So oftentimes the big mistake, and I can admit I did it when I first started learning how to cook when I was a kid, that my heat was on high. It was just high or off. That was the only option, right? No, there's a middle option there. There's a lot of middle options, but with that middle option comes some patience. You have to be a little bit of patience to just wait for things to heat up properly. They'll get there. So if you feel like this is getting too hot too fast, or you're seeing smoke, steam and smoke are going to be different, but if I'm seeing smoke, turn the heat down, or even better yet, just pull the pan away from the heat source to cool that down quickly. So in a medium saucepan over medium heat, I'm going to add the olive oil and butter. Once the oil is hot and the butter is bubbly, sounds pretty bubbly to me, I'm going to add the onion. So I'm going to add the onion, and sweat until the onion is translucent. So that means that it's just a little clear and see-through. So if you can see my onion now in that pot, you can definitely see white dots of onion. It's really white, but I want it to be translucent. I want it to be a little bit clear, and that's what happens when we apply heat to it. And then it starts to get a little tender. I want to make sure that I'm just getting translucent on this, a little bit like that clear look, but no color, because any color, if I start to burn my butter, burn my oil, burn my onion, that's going to transfer to my finished product, and then now my finished product is going to not only taste burnt, but probably look a little burnt too. So I'm going to have darker pieces of onion in there, which I don't want. So once my onion is translucent, I'm going to add the orzo pasta and cook until golden brown, 4 to 6 minutes. Add my orzo pasta. And then I'm going to add the rice and cook until it turns bright white, about 5 to 7 minutes. And then once I've added my rice, I can add my dry spice and herbs. Turn my heat down just a tad. The pan that you use, make sure you have a nice tight-fitting lid. That's going to be imperative with making rice as well, is that you have a lid that fits well on top of your pot. So this is starting to look a little clearer. It's not all the way there, but I know that I'm going to get my orzo brown and I'm going to sweat my rice a little bit. So I still have some time for this onion to be sweating while I still have orzo in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add my orzo, because my onion, it's not like my onion is stopping cooking. It's still cooking. The heat is still applied. It's still happening. So I'll get my orzo in there. So add the orzo pasta and cook until golden brown, 4 to 6 minutes. So this process with the heat I have and the butter I have that's very hot is pretty much toasting my pasta. So it's going to toast it and it's going to get it brown, and that's just building on flavor. Just getting little elements of flavor and layers of flavor. And this is also the same process that you might take making rice-a-roni. Some of those rice-a-roni packets tell you, put butter in the pan, add your pasta and the rice mixture, and get it in your pan and toast it and get it to where it's brown. This is that same process. And the whole reason, it's flavor. Once I have some color, that caramelized color, that's going to be flavor. Caramelize is different from carbonize, so we don't want it burnt. No burning, just some browning. So I have lots of bubbling of my butter. I'm going to turn my heat down a little bit more, just to make sure that I do have heat, but it's not too aggressive and it's not going to start burning before I can add my liquid. Because once I add my liquid, I know things are going to cool down just a tad, and I'm applying a different type of heat. I've got hot liquid happening instead of just hot fat happening. Notice that I'm also stirring this pretty frequently, just because I want to make sure that it's not burning. It's really bubbly. I can't really see the bottom if I just don't stir it. So I want to make sure that I'm stirring it frequently so I can see what's going on with that rice, and then it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to let this go a little bit longer until I see some color change in my orzo. All right, I pulled my pot off of the heat because it is getting my rice to turn colors, or my orzo to turn colors, which is exactly what I want. So you can see there's different variations of brown of my orzo, and it's toasted. It's exactly what I need. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my rice. Get that well coated in the fat. So it says add rice and cook until it turns bright white, about 5 to 7 minutes. May not take that long, but I also don't want to compromise the browning that I also have going on with the orzo, because like I said with the onion, just because I added the orzo doesn't mean my onion stopped sweating. Now that I added the rice doesn't mean that orzo is going to stop browning. So I want to make sure everything gets done the nice right time. So this may not take quite that long. Like I said, I just want to make sure I'm not compromising everything else and burning everything else while I'm trying to wait for this rice to get white. I will give it a few minutes though. Pull this off the heat again. You can see that maybe you can see my bubbles of butter. They're starting to turn a little more caramelized brown, which is good, but that also means that it's on its way to going to burn eventually. So I want to be careful of that. And I can see that my rice is vibrantly white. And again, I still have that nice toasted orzo pasta. So now that I have everything toasted, I'm going to add the salt, garlic powder, pepper, paprika, and onion powder and continue to heat and coat the rice and the orzo in the seasoning. So this is something else we talk a lot about with culinary too, that I have these dry spices. This part of adding my dry spices at the beginning of cooking, when I have hot fat or just dry heat, is key because all my spices sit in a shelf, dry, and kind of dormant, in a dormant stage. Once I add them to this hot fat, it makes them kind of awake and alive, and that hot fat gets into there, makes them aromatic. I can start smelling some seasoning that's going on there. But dry spices and dry herbs are going to be added at the beginning of cooking, where I have a fresh herb, parsley, I'm going to add at the end of cooking, because I want to keep this fresh color, that fresh flavor, and I don't want to cook it to death with my rice here. My rice has got to cook. I don't need to cook my parsley. So then now I'm going to carefully pour the chicken stock in the hot pan. I'll cover with a lid. So I have hot fat here. I have a lot of liquid. You should hear a sizzle. You should expect a lot of steam. So be careful when pouring that liquid in. Give that a couple stirs just to make sure that everything's incorporated well. So then I'm going to cover with a lid and simmer for 15 minutes. So simmer for 15 minutes. I have this nice fitting lid, that's great. But I want to make sure I'm simmering and I'm not boiling. How am I going to know that when I have a lid on here? So a couple indicators that are going to help me know that is once I see steam kind of puffing out through the seam between the lid and the pot, that's a good indicator things are getting hot. I can definitely peek inside, take a little peek. This is a really well-fitting lid. Take a peek, see what's going on inside. Is it simmering? Is it boiling? Boiling is big, big, big bubbles. Lots of aggressive bubbles happening. And it may come to a boil, which is fine, but now you have to reduce it to a simmer. So reduce your heat down to a simmer. So simmer is going to be little gentle bubbles, maybe little gentle bubbles around the edge of the pan. But you want to make sure you know the difference, the simmering and the boiling. Boiling is big bubbles. That's what we do to pasta, right? We cook pasta in boiling water. We want those big, big bubbles. But simmer is gentle, slow bubbles. If I boil, I'm going to run the risk of burning the bottom of the pot. But that boil is too aggressive and there's too much heat evaporating and working that my rice isn't going to cook properly. So even if for some reason I didn't even burn the bottom of my pan, my rice is probably going to have a hard time cooking properly. So it might take a little while to get to that simmer. So I'm not going to start my 15-minute timer until I'm at that simmer. So I might turn my heat up just a tad and then keep an eye on it. Don't just turn the heat up, set the timer 15 minutes and walk away. Make sure you're keeping an eye on it. Make sure it's maintaining that simmer for the 15 minutes. Once I have simmered for 15 minutes, I can remove the lid and add the chopped parsley. So I'm going to babysit this. I'm going to make sure that it comes to the simmer, and then I set my 15-minute timer, and then we can start adding our parsley. So I wanted to show you, you can see a few puffs of steam coming from the side of the pot here. And then when I take a peek, this is on a verge of a boil to a simmer. This is kind of an aggressive simmer in my opinion. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. Give it a quick stir just to make sure it's not sticking to the bottom or anything. And I think we're getting there closer to a simmer. So some of those gentler bubbles is what I want to see, not the big aggressive bubbles. So my 15 minutes has passed. Ooh, steamy. You can definitely see no liquid on the top here, and it's looking pretty dry on the bottom. That's a good sign. Turn my heat down a little bit more too. So now what my instructions say is to remove the lid. So 15 minutes has passed. I'm going to remove the lid, add my chopped parsley. Stir in your chopped parsley. It looks a little wet still. So it says cover and continue to cook for 5 more minutes until all of the stock is absorbed. Taste for doneness and adjust seasoning if needed. So I'm going to put the lid back on here. I'm going to do 5 more minutes. I may even kill the heat because this is still going to harbor lots and lots of heat for a really, really long time. So even for it just to stand for 5 minutes and continue to absorb some of that water that may be left in the pan with the lid on it, it's going to do the job. So we're going to let this stand for 5 minutes. I've just killed the heat. Like I said, this is going to stay hot for a while. If you have a lot of stock still left in your pot, maybe your heat was down really low, leave your heat on just a little bit longer, really, really low, lid on, 5 minutes. My 5 minutes is up. Oh, it's looking a lot better. Doesn't look soupy or super dry. It's a good one. So my last bit of my steps here, it says taste for doneness and seasoning. Adjust seasoning if needed. So I'm going to taste for doneness and for seasoning. So a lot of times in the kitchen, and especially with cooking, not as much with baking, tasting our food is key. I don't want to just assume that everything is okay and then I serve it to family or friends and then it's absolutely not okay. It's not done, there's raw rice in there, or it's too salty or not salty enough. So tasting, that's the only way we're going to get to know this information. So we can taste it. And so for doneness, I'm checking to see that I'm not crunching on raw rice, that it's al dente. Al dente meaning to the bite. So there's a little bit of give. There's also not mush in my mouth. It's not overcooked and mushy. So for doneness, that it's nice and al dente. Has a little bit of bite to it, but like I said, no crunch. I don't want a crunch of raw rice in here. And then for my seasoning, is it seasoned enough? Does it need more salt? Maybe did I have too much salt? If I have too much salt, maybe not a lot going back with that one. Once it's kind of absorbed in my rice, my pasta, it's not much to go back to. So that's why we want to follow the recipe and get our measuring down correctly. But there's other seasonings I could do. Maybe I wanted to taste the parsley more. Maybe I had more parsley, go ahead and throw that in. Maybe I wanted that garlic flavor more. Maybe I can add some more granulated garlic. So I can do some things to get with the seasoning. And then same with pepper. If I wanted it peppery, I could add more pepper. But when you're done, you have this really pretty rice pilaf. And to me, it looks like the same stuff you get out of the box. But it's from scratch. Get the steam out of there. And then when you go buy the ingredients to get for this rice pilaf, you probably have enough for a couple batches. I know the rice pilaf or the rice-a-roni, it's like $1 a box. But for a few more dollars, you can have all of the ingredients for this and then keep making it, and it's not that difficult, and it's going to be from scratch. You know everything that's in it. It's not full of a bunch of interesting, questionable things. You can pronounce all of the ingredients because they're things you find in your kitchen. And that is your rice pilaf.